It takes courage to speak the truth, and Parisia is an American Freedom Alliance production where we celebrate and elevate those with that courage. All right, a very hearty and warm and wonderful welcome to my great friend Barak Lurie, lawyer, radio show host, and author. We just had a literary cafe about his third book, but second in the series, Atheism Destroys. And there was so much that we weren't able to get to. I wanted to make sure that we got to some more meat, because it was just a fabulous conversation, a very important book. And the notion of godlessness is fundamental. So warm welcome to you, Barak.
Thank you, Karen, for having me. It's really always a pleasure to connect with you. It's the like-mindedness of our way of thinking is wonderful, and it is so interesting to when I write books. A lot of times I think of a few people, as if they're watching over my shoulder as I write.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, of course, is Dennis Prager. Another of them is my dad. Another of them is you. Being able to kind of, because you always think of such very interesting things, and I often think, what would Karen think about this particular issue? So I take that as the highest compliment I could give you.
I can't imagine one higher myself. Thank you. I so appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet.
That means a lot. Thank you. Well, I will try to do it justice then.
Good, yeah.
The regard in which you hold me. So that moves me a lot, and I know that it was in conversation with Avi, my predecessor with the American Freedom Alliance, the late great Avi Davis, that inspired you to write these books. Am I right?
Well, yeah, it was in the context of a speech I was giving at the American Freedom Alliance. Avi was very kind about letting me have free reign to speak about whatever I wanted to speak about. And to me, it was always a passion to speak about the dangers of atheism. And I wanted to make it very clear that atheism was an extremely dangerous enterprise. I had always felt that way. And while I was giving my speech at the time, I was kind of going through the numbers. I started saying that I anticipate writing a book talking about the dangers of atheism within 9 or so months of that. And I was going to give, and so 7.5 years later, boom, there it was. So it took a long time. What can I say? But it was a passion of the heart, and something that I just wanted to bust, because this notion that somehow religion has caused more deaths than anything else was such an offense. It was such a libel. That I felt I had to correct the record, as it were. I know a lot of other people have done so, but not in the same way that I feel like I have coalesced it together and made it clear to the masses, to the public, that religion indeed has given far more good to the world than anything the absence of religion could possibly be said to have given. In fact, the absence of religion is not just the absence of goodness; it's the creation and encouragement of evil. That's what it is. So you simply have to have it. It's just like you have to have water, you have to have air. You must have God in civilization if you expect it to thrive. You will only have death and despair. I would even say that it's not such a great analogy, now that I think about it, that not having air, not having water, yes, it's deadly, but it's not evil, right? If you lack water one day and you're in the desert and you die, well, you wouldn't say that Barak, he died of evil, as a result of the lack of water. No, he died because of lack of water. Something that was necessary, but was not inherently evil, but its absence. The absence of God does lead to evil, and there's no getting around it. It's very, very hard to not have a world full of evil if you do not take care of keeping God in the equation. It's more akin to, if you leave your house completely without any maintenance whatsoever, you can't expect rats in the house. You can't expect decay. You can't expect crime and looting inside the house. That's what's going to happen. And I think that's more of an apt analogy.
Well, that brings me to, in a sense, when you open your book with the child's fairy tale about the three little pigs,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So is that analogous to the same kind of evil?
It's exactly what I want to say. And
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that up. That's exactly right. The Three Little Pigs may very well be the most apt fairy tale of our times, and perhaps maybe the most apt fairy tale of all time, simply because it talks about, I mean, think about it, right? The Three Little Pigs, the whole concept of it is you have to guard against the evil. You can't just do a roughshod job in order to prevent people from getting into your house. You have to build it sturdy. And it also talks, it's also what it's not about, right? The Three Little Pigs is not a story about trying to understand the big bad wolf, hoping that one day he'll join the community of animals, right? It doesn't work that way in Three Little Pigs. The big bad wolf is recognized to be a big bad wolf. He is evil. We have to deal with him. We have to guard against him. And the notion is that the big bad wolf will always be out there and we have to be ready. That's it. And isn't it funny how, the two younger pigs, the ones who build their houses out of straw on the one hand and then sticks on the other, they run over to their older brother, who is the one who does it in the right way, and they seek consolation and resolve. And I, of course, I tweak the story a little bit, but really not meaningfully. It's the same story, and in the end, when they successfully repel the big bad wolf, and he runs off into the distance, becoming ever so smaller, with his tail literally between his legs, and it's being burnt because it was caught fire from the chimney. The other two pigs say, "Oh, isn't this great? We don't have to worry anymore." And the older pig, the one who built the big brick house, says, "Oh, we still do. We still do." And you always got to be vigilant, and that's the point. That's why the big bad wolf story is so important. We always have to treasure it and understand that this is the way it works. The big bad wolf is always coming to your door, and you have to be ready.
Right. And you don't have to understand deeply the nature of evil, but you do have to recognize its existence.
Yeah.
And just because you decide it doesn't exist doesn't mean that they're not coming to get you, right? I mean, this is the pacifism, the appeasement, this notion of, as you said, oh, maybe, if we let him have your house, he won't come after our house. It doesn't work that way, right? And
if only it did, then we could always have negotiations. But look, the fact is that, and this is something that I say on my radio show and my podcasts and otherwise, and we've talked about it ourselves, that there is never, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I have no problem being corrected, but I'm still looking for it. There's never been a time ever where diplomacy has worked with a dictatorship. Never. That's a fascinating thing to me. It's worked with other democracies. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's why we don't have battles with Canada, right? That's why the notion of a war between modern day Japan and present day, modern day America is inconceivable. It's just not possible because we're two democracies. But when you're talking about a dictatorship, no, sir, diplomacy has never, ever worked. It's only about being tough, showing peace through strength. That's it. Ronald Reagan understood that. And I think Trump understood that too.
And the opposite is also true. War through weakness. You show weakness. It's not a benign thing. You will be run over roughshod, as we're seeing now, time and time again. Peace through strength. Absolutely. It's not, is it just dictatorships, or is it specific kinds of dictatorships, or are dictatorships, generally speaking, godless? Is it the godlessness that's the issue?
Right. Well, it is the godlessness. Generally speaking, a dictator, there are very few dictators who are true believers in God. They don't go very well hand in hand when you think about it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian values do not lend themselves to seeking dictatorial powers.
If you're a true Jew, somebody who really understands the Bible, if you're a true Christian who really understands the Bible, you'll know that God did not want people to have kings. They wanted them to rule themselves in somewhat of a republic/democracy fashion, something akin to what we have today. we do want to have leaders. Yes, of course, that there's no doubt about it. But we don't want dictators. Dictators will always abuse their power. We know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And God didn't want such leaders, didn't want kings, because he was afraid, correctly, I think, that people would, bow all and give all their powers to the king, as opposed, and all the respect, and instead of God himself. And that would be the issue. So I find it very rare to find a leader, a dictator of today, who in any way you could describe as somebody who is a true Christian, a true Jew. I just don't see it. Now, you might think about Putin. Putin is an atheist. Putin was raised in an atheist family. It is true that he, in the past couple of decades, has helped build some of the Russian Orthodox churches within Russia. But that doesn't mean that he himself is a true believer. It just might mean that he's simply trying to appeal to the masses by giving them what they want and allowing them to say that. That's one of the biggest mistakes of the Soviet Union, is that they crushed all religious expression. And that was just one of the stupidest things that a dictator could have done. You need to give them something. You need to give them some, at least cynical hope. But the Soviet Union didn't do that. I think Putin may have learned from that lesson, but he himself is an avowed atheist. I have no doubt about that. And he's demonstrating that to me. Nobody who has a true Christian background would do what he's doing today in Ukraine. It's despicable. Yeah.
Right. So leftism and godlessness, they seem to go completely hand in hand. Godlessness rejects those fundamental tenets that contribute to good, to prosperity. And it seems like that's what the left does as well. Would you agree with that? Are there areas where they are inimical to each other, or is it fair to say that they are pretty much tied, even though Joe Biden claims to be a Catholic, Nancy Pelosi claims to be a Catholic, and they stand on this religiosity that we know and have nothing to do with how they actually believe?
Well, it's interesting because I guess there's two parts to that. I'll take the first part where, is there a correlation between leftism on the one hand and godlessness on the other? And I think there's a very strong correlation, and for good reason. The thing about leftism, when you think about it, it's anything goes, right? There's a sense of, okay, what's the next thing that they'll think about that's utterly crazy, right? The notion that a man can be a woman, that a man can participate in women's sports, that you don't need an ID for your voting, all the crazy things that we're seeing, right? America is a horrible racist nation. Never mind, of course, that all other countries had slavery as well. I don't need to explain to you.
Yes.
But there's a madness going on, and it just gets more and more crazy. There's no ending point. There's no point where you can say, okay, well, once we've achieved X issue, we've pretty much resolved the world's issues, and now we can go on our merry way. We're happy now, we progressives. It said no progressive ever, right? So it's not like that with them. So it's this anything goes attitude. Now that's very consistent with what Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn and so many great leaders in the world of God have said, that without God, anything is possible. Anything is permitted, according to Dostoevsky. And I think he was right. So you have this crazy notion. So it's very appealing. They do go hand in hand. Atheism and leftism. It's one of the same in many ways. It's just that leftism is the vehicle for atheism to express itself. And that's what we're saying. There's no way that somebody who truly loves God can accept this notion that, well, if you feel like a man, then you're a man. If you feel like you're a woman, you're a woman. And as far as you're concerned, if you feel like destroying America, that's okay too. And abortion is that's not the taking of a life. I mean, these are things that don't make any sense. There's so many, not just inconsistencies, but things that are literally on its head. Up is the new down, as the Radiohead song goes. Right. So this is what we're dealing with. So the answer is, there's such a strong correlation between atheism and leftism that one would hesitate to say that there's anybody, virtually any true Christian, any true Jew, who's on the far left.
So it seems like the only thing in all the world that is not permitted under this godlessness / leftism literally is having standards.
Yeah.
Is having accountability, because men can be women, women can be men, boys can compete with girls as a girl, and use their bathroom. You can put rapists in women's prisons if they declare themselves to be female on a given day. So that's gender identity. Having you in California, no, I don't know if it's California. I don't remember what state it was. I think it is California. 3 adults together can adopt a child.
Yeah.
This idea that there is an optimal family structure has been torn down. This idea that science has any meaning has been torn down, and yet they scream about science. The only thing you're not allowed to have is a set of core values, accountability, and standards.
Yeah. That's right. Standards is the ultimate bugaboo of the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't stand the idea of standards because, you know, if you say that getting an A+ is very important to get into college, well, I say that, you know, because my kid, my little Johnny, he can't get an A+, and you're depriving him of something, whatever that is.
Right.
The notion of hard work, the notion of decency, the notion of integrity and truth. These are now considered part of a patriarchal structure that is offensive and based upon racism or what have you.
Yes.
So they have to destroy standards. Standards is inimical to everything that they believe in, and they haven't met a standard that they can't imagine blowing up. They want to blow up every single standard, no matter what it is. And that's why you're seeing, and we don't need to drill down on this, I'm simply saying that the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of fathers as necessary, the breakdown of having only 2 parents, for example, not 3 or 15 for that matter, the breakdown of what is appropriate sexual conduct,
Mm-hmm.
the notion that, you know, it's a standard, isn't it, that you can't have sex with anyone younger than 18 if you're older than 18, right? That would be, and especially from man upon a young lady. So that is that's a standard that you're going to start seeing falling apart too, because I mean it should be accepted as a standard. You would think so, but they'll say it's arbitrary. Why 18? Why not 17? Why not 16? And there's some very mature young ladies who are 16, and they should be able to do what they want. Not only that, but and this is the argument. I'm telling you, this is to a theater near you. They're going to be saying things like, well, look, kids have sexual desires. They have sexual feelings as well. What's wrong with exploring that? You know, is there anything wrong with that? It feels good to touch oneself down there, right? Or to touch somebody else down there, so long as they say it's okay, right? So it's going to open that door. They're going to try to trivialize sexual behavior as sexuality for that matter. You know, it's just like having ice cream. You know, you wouldn't complain if little Johnny wants to go out with little Sally and get some ice cream. You know, ice cream is a very pleasant outing. Let's go. Let's have fun. So what? You know, it's this so what attitude. And, you know, so because these barriers are very easy to break, they want to break down all these barriers. Just think about it. If you do not have God in your life, then the only thing you really have is the here and now and the pleasantries of what life has to offer. Mm-hmm. Does that mean smoking and taking drugs? Yes. Does that mean having sex whenever you feel like it? Yes. Does it mean not doing hard work? Absolutely. Does it mean not planning for the future? Yes, absolutely. Does it mean not caring about your history? Yes, absolutely. All these things. See, it all fits within one patchwork. So you're going to see a lot more of this clamoring for strange behavior that right now would be so bizarre to us, but nevertheless will be considered the norm. And if you want proof of that, then I just invite you all to take, you know, yourself through the Wayback Machine to the year 2000, let's say, and tell people, hey, by the year 2020, 2022, as we are right now, you're going to see people talking about men and women as interchangeable, that you can be whatever you want to be. And we would be just aghast at that. We would say that's just an absurd thing. That's a future that cannot possibly happen. You're crazy, Karen, for thinking that.
Right.
Likewise, for deciding to be a man or woman, right? Likewise for competing in women's sports, that we would bark like seals, to applaud this guy who's now, championing over all these girls, and these girls are afraid to say anything in response, right?
Yeah.
So it's all very bizarre, but if we can do that, and then there's gay marriage, of course. And now the destruction of marriage itself, and the notion that we're going to have 3 parents, 4 parents, 5 parents, because why not, right? If it's so expensive to send little Johnny to college with only 2 incomes, well, wouldn't 3 incomes be awesome? I mean, let's do it.
It's
right?
only
It's all
fair to
practical.
little Johnny, really.
Yeah, and not only that, but little Johnny gets the love from a 3rd parent or 4th parent or 15th parent. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't love all that matters? And isn't that great that Johnny's getting all these parents love? Right. So this is the logic behind it, but things that would seem so absurd to us today will not be that absurd 10 years from now. So I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot more nudity in the future. There's going to be a lot more open sex in the future. There will be a lot of polyamory going on, meaning a lot of couples, all together. Because what's the harm? That's what they'll say. There'll be even talk more about incest. Which is such a bizarre taboo, but people don't think about it. They say, well, that should never be, that will never happen. Okay, yeah, sure. Don't be so sure.
Here, before I do want to talk about incest, but before we go down that path, I want to revert back to what you were saying about normalizing young kids being encouraged really to be more adventurous sexually. And you had said all these arguments. Another argument, though, is they're going to do it anyway. They do it anyway. They've always done it anyway. Why not put it in a healthy framework? So you're part of that argument is killing shame. And I think what we've been seeing throughout the last couple decades is the killing of shame. To our detriment. Nobody's ashamed of anything at all anymore, which goes back to codes of conduct and standards. If you have no sense in your core of being ashamed of a thing that you did, lying, stealing, being rude to somebody on the street, it seems to me that part of that is this idea of embracing behavior that at one time had been considered something you didn't want to do. That's not the same as shaming to such an extreme that you've really hurt a child. But you've killed the very idea that there might be things one should be ashamed of.
Right. Well, exactly right. If you're caught I don't know, cheating on a test, embezzling from your company, having sex with minors, God forbid, you should be ashamed of that. And I want the world to be ashamed of that. Otherwise, we're psychopaths. I mean, that's the whole point. David Wood, who is a famous psychopath who, almost killed his father. He found God while he was in prison. It was a remarkable transformation. But he himself noted that we are creating a society now which in turn seeks to create more psychopaths without realizing it, because it's what I call the me generation in a house full of mirrors, right? That's what it is. And we have been told that all that matters is me. You don't matter. Think about all the notion of completion. We talked about this before, Karen, you and I.
Yes.
Where, in the olden days when we were all younger and we were dating and you met somebody special, you would say, oh, he completes me. She completes me. I'm assertive and an outgoing person, but she really completes me. She brings the kindness in me, and that, we feel completed. And in the process, we feel like we have an obligation to somebody else as much as they have an obligation to us. It's completion. Right. The platonic halves finally meet together and they roll together. It's a very cute little thing. Not so anymore. Now it's all about how do you chase your orgasm? What thrills you, right? It's not about what can you do for somebody else? How can you complete somebody else? It's all about you. And there's no such thing as the opposite of you that might help you. It's
Exactly
only
right.
about your orgasm. And it's like the Woody Allen movie Sleeper, where they have the orgasmatron, right? And there's no point in couples actually having sex anymore if the whole point is just to pursue an orgasm, and not even have kids whatsoever, and not even have families. Well, then yeah, let's go to the orgasmatron future.
Right.
And that's what they're looking for, apparently. They would like to have a childless future where everyone can still enjoy the benefits of sex, but without any of those silly consequences, such as having children, which is the ultimate reason why sex is there in the first place.
So
Fascinating to me.
godlessness and narcissism obviously go, and leftism as well, go completely hand in hand. If it really is all about me,
Yes.
and whatever I do, the purpose is to realize my own personal full potential, nothing to do with my mutual responsibilities with a partner, to my community, to my country, to God. There's no sense of anything bigger than me.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. That is a very fair assessment. There's no reason for that. Look, most atheists will ultimately have to acknowledge what you said. There's very little in atheism where they say, okay, let's get together, let's say once a week, let's say on a Sunday, to talk about how we can be better human beings to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Said no atheist ever, right? They want
Right.
the benefit of being able to say that they're moral people, but the question is begged, why? Why would you want to be a moral person? And P.S. morality is a standard, right?
Exactly.
So I thought you don't like standards, and they come from everywhere. They come from your heart. Well, why does it come from your heart? All those things that we talked about, but ultimately, atheism is about survival of the fittest. It's your own personal survival. What can you get good for yourself, and what can you do? What kind of goodies can you achieve for yourself? And they think very highly of themselves, these atheists. I have to tell you, I know, because I was one myself. And they think that not only are they right, but they are better than you from a moral point of view, because they perceive incorrectly that Christians, especially Christians, are hypocrites, that they profess to go to church and be kind to each other every Sunday, but in reality, they steal and they kill, and they would like to destroy any other religion that's not just like their own. It's a cartoonish characterization, mind you, but nevertheless, that's what they believe, these atheists, about Christianity. They have no idea about what Christianity actually teaches. It's all about relationships. Everything about Christianity and Judaism is about the understanding of relationships, the promotion of relationships. And the whole Bible is a book about relationships when you think about it, right? Here's Moses, relating with Pharaoh. Here's Joseph and his brothers relating with one another and how they dealt with each other. Here's King David dealing with his 4 sons, and Bathsheba, for that matter. Everything is about it. It's about relationships. Atheism has nothing to do with the relationships, other than to what extent can they help you somehow survive. That's it. So there's narcissism. I love the way you put it, Karen. It's all about narcissism at the end of the day. It is self-interest and self-interest only. And they perceive incorrectly that somehow atheism is the bomb, and we should all enjoy this wonderful approach to looking at the world, because it's, atheism has been so awesome wherever it's been tried.
Right. But also, it seems to me religion, Judeo-Christianity, Judaism and Christianity in particular, are about ideals. That's not to say that they can be attained, because we know that they can't be attained, but that doesn't mean one shouldn't have ideals. And it seems to me a lot of the argument that I get back to when I send out emails about your book, for example, as you mentioned, it's all hypocrisy. No, it's a recognition of ideals, no matter how unattainable. But yet they are supremely valid, valuable, purposeful ideals, even knowing they're not necessarily attainable. They're recognitions that we as human beings are going to fail. None of us is without sin one way or another. That doesn't mean that we're hypocrites in our sinfulness. We can strive, right?
Right.
And
Well, it's
so,
just like you have a, whenever you take a test, a math test or whatever, a history test, you strive to get 100, right?
yeah,
You may not get 100. You
right,
make a 98, which is pretty darn good as it is, but you would never say, well, you failed as a
right,
human being,
exactly.
as you didn't do it perfectly. But the atheist will always have that. That's the problem, Karen, is that you have with millions of people, billions of people on the planet, and billions professing love for Christianity, and millions professing love for Judaism, you'll always be able to find somebody who missteps, who
Yes,
who
of
happens to
course.
be, let's say, an observant Jew even, and who was caught doing X. Okay, so boom, that's it. That's the end of Judaism. There's the hypocrisy for you, and
Right.
you can dismiss it. This is the nature of the atheist. The atheist, by contrast, can say, oh, we're not even striving for perfection. We don't have those
Exactly.
standards at all. So you can't catch us, right?
That's
So,
right.
but somehow they're more accurate. The fact that you try for an ideal, like you said, that just the notion of trying for an ideal creates an inherent hypocrisy, because you
Right.
can never achieve that ideal. It's fascinating.
Right. Much better to just say, oh, well, whatever. I derive my own value system through logic and my
Right.
brain, and I'm much more rational than you, Barak, who gets your marching orders from the Bible. Those don't make any sense. I can figure out on my own, because I have a way big brain, what's right and what's wrong. And
Yeah.
the guy next to me can decide for his or her own self what's right and wrong. And we're just way smarter.
Right. That's exactly right.
Right.
Fascinating. It's a fascinating world in the mind of the atheist. Look, atheism is a destructive. We know that it's a destructive ideology, and yes, it is an ideology. People keep on trying to argue with me about this one. They're just wrong. To say that it's not an ideology is like saying that that like not believing in law and order is somehow not an ideology. Of course it is. It will lead to disastrous consequences, right? I don't believe in hygiene, you might say, right? Well, that's okay. But that's an ideology, and it has disastrous consequences. So tomato, as it were. But atheism, a world without God, leads to horrific results, and it's very hard to argue otherwise.
But let's
Go
be
ahead.
clear, though, that your books don't rail particularly against individuals who follow that ideology. It's that ideology as a governance system
Yes, it
that
is.
causes
But
the
it
issues.
also, but if you actually live your life consistent with your beliefs, it's not
Mhm.
just a governance system, which is of course very important, but because I mean that's where it gets really destructive. But if you actually live your own life as a true atheist,
Mhm.
then you will have a destructive life yourself. Terrible things will happen to you. And I don't mean just, because God is going to rail against you because you don't believe in him. No, you will lead a highly destructive and very unhappy, very depressed life without God. So you can decide not to believe in God. I get that. But just to understand that it leads to destructive things. It doesn't make you in and of itself a bad person,
Mhm.
but it does say that your belief is a destructive belief. It's like, I don't know, I believing in eating battery acid. Okay, I just, I may believe in that. That doesn't make me a bad person. But if I start eating battery acid, bad things are going to happen to me.
Mhm.
That's the way it is. So what do I mean by the atheism thing? Bad things will happen to you. What happens is ultimately you begin to think that you're above the law. You have to be you'll observe the law so long as it still suits you.
Mhm.
Because yeah, you sure you understand that nobody should be able to drive 85 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, but hey, you're careful. You're not going to get in any accident, so you can do it because frankly you're a responsible person. You see how it works. That's just one example. But why not steal a little bit, just a little bit, right? You go into a store and you see some money in the till, it's wide open, the cash register guy is not there, and you steal $40 from the cash register and off you go. There's no cameras or anything else. You're good to go. Okay. And you think to yourself, well, listen, I need the money for whatever reason. I need to take care of, I need to get some aspirin for my little kid.
Mhm.
Right. And I can't afford it. So I need to steal this money or to steal the aspirin itself. There's logic to that. There really is. And you can also, and he'll tell himself, that CVS or Target, whatever, they've got plenty of money and they built it into their accounting books. That's the way it works. So no big deal. It is the inherent logic of the atheist. They will tell you, no, that's not correct. We believe in not doing that for the sake of not doing that. No, they're full of crap. They are full of crap. They don't believe in the standards. They can't. So they will do things when push comes to shove. They'll do what they need to do, and they will rationalize anything that they do. There's no what I call necessary guilt. As that classic cloud over, Charlie Brown.
Somebody's watching.
Somebody's
if
watching.
You have literally no sense of anybody watching. Why not?
Yeah, there really is never a problem in that department, and you can tell yourself a lot of things to get by in your life, but it's ultimately an unhappy life because there's a life without purpose. And an atheist has never been able to answer that question to me. Where is your purpose? Putting aside the free will question and all the other things that are so obvious to ask, how do you explain consciousness and self-awareness and all the things that we could, but there's no free will and there's certainly no purpose in your life. Why not just go about and grab as many toys and money and sex as you can, and then when you die, and whoever had the most experiences of fun, well, then he's the winner, I suppose. That's the way it works.
Right.
So atheism is very destructive. So I appreciate your saying, Barak, you're not saying that atheists themselves are bad, and it's a governance thing. Well, yes, I am saying it's the governance thing. Whenever it's employed, it's always a horrible thing. But also, if you as an individual employ atheism in your own life, you will lead a very destructive, very unhappy life. Watch out for yourself. Ask yourself if you really want to live that life, because it will be, you will destroy yourself from within. Guaranteed.
From there, I would like to pivot, but it's not that big a pivot, to how the godlessness atheistic worldview contributed to the surreally destructive response to COVID.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think that is very much a way to describe it. I mean, the way you can figure this out, that atheism had a very large play in the way we responded to COVID, is to just do a thought experiment. What if COVID hit, this exact same virus, from China, Wuhan, whatever it is, and the same claims from a bat, in a wet market, whatever it is. We know that it was from a lab probably, but anyway, let's just pretend that all this happened, not in the year 2020, but rather in the year 1980, 40 years before then, when there was a lot more God in our culture. What would we have done? Would we have done exactly the same thing? And I think both of us know very intuitively that it would not have been this way.
Right.
We know that we would have said, okay, well, there's this virus coming out of China. Just watch out, wash your hands a lot more. It's a thing that's going around. It's affecting, the elderly and those who are otherwise frail. So please be mindful of that, and all the best, everyone. That's about it. And because that's the way we'd have to function. Part of the reason why we did what we did is because of the technology that we're using right now, for example, through remote learning and otherwise. So they say, well, because we can do things remotely, therefore we should mandate everything to be done remotely. And that way we can avoid people from getting exposed to the virus, right? But if we didn't have this technology, as we didn't have back in 1980, then I suspect that we wouldn't have this shutdown at all, because people would not have been able to function whatsoever. But more to your point, to what role did God, or the lack of God, play?
Right.
When you have God in your life, you tend not to have fear. Fear is a very big issue in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. It is the most common phrase in the Bible from God that you should not fear. Fear is such an endemic part of human nature that God has to say over and over again, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. And we have to resist ourselves. The temptation to be afraid, to hide in the corner, is very strong. So But those without God, those without Christianity and Judaism, they tend to give in to their fears. They think it's rational to be afraid. It is very unhealthy, in fact. We know through Christianity and Judaism that the one thing God wants from us is to relate to each other, to be good to each other. The idea that we need to hide from each other is, I think, not only anathema to Christianity and Judaism, but offensive to Christianity and Judaism. It's an offense to God. Look, the most terrifying thing you could do to anybody, punishment-wise, is not send him to prison for 40 years, but to keep him in solitary confinement for even 3 weeks.
Yes.
That is terrifying. That's the worst thing you can do to anybody. And yet somehow we kind of had this self-imposed solitary confinement. People did horrific things to one another. And to themselves in particular, they ended up killing themselves. The depression rate was absurd. And I think the only way that this could have happened is when you had there was enough critical mass in society that said, yeah, that's cool, thumbs up on staying at home and doing everything remotely and not seeing each other at all, not going to the grocery store even, and being totally cloistered from one another. That is an atheist mindset. That's why it was no surprise to you and me. And I remember you attending protests just like I did, Karen.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. When we were out there, a lot of it outside, sometimes inside, everyone around us were believers.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Because we knew God wants us to congregate. God wants us to connect with one another. But an atheist thinks that that's all so silly. A church is just a ridiculous concept. You can do it. You're free. It's a free country, so to speak, still. But that's your silly business. And frankly, it has to stop where it affects my health. That's the way they look at it. Conversely, we religious folks were the ones saying, we demand to go to church. We demand to go to synagogue because we cannot have our health impacted. We will not have any meaningful existence without our spiritual health. That's it.
And I remember thinking early on when they shut, just that we used the phrase shut down, I still reel from that expression, shut down churches. And I remember saying and having this conversation with a lot of people, you included, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, shutting down, but that which is to God, that which is God's. And that's the church. And that any clergy of any religion at all allowed Caesar to say, shut your doors, just blew my mind. You just completely negated everything that you've claimed to believe. I couldn't understand that. But then slowly it was the churches and synagogues also, some churches, some synagogues, that said, we are not closing. And hallelujah for them to take that stand.
Yeah.
And it was believers who said, you don't know, you don't get to. And I think we are the ones less willing to embrace fear.
You're so right. And the irony of it all, I don't know if the irony is the right word, but the interesting aspect of it at all is that despite the efforts of those who went to church, you didn't see these clusters of super spreaders from churches, right? It just didn't happen. And we know because had it been, they would have announced it loud and proudly,
Absolutely.
These crazy Christians, they got together and sure enough, 80% of them died. Shame on them. They have themselves to answer to. And, their crazy sky god, they can explain that to him, as to why they killed themselves and others. No, nothing like that. Nothing whatsoever. It was all garbage.
Absolutely. They were waiting just gleefully, I might add, just could not wait, because the joy that they would have had if even 3 from MacArthur, various other churches had gotten sick, but no, they couldn't. So there's the fear part that got in the way, but also this had struck me during all this time. We talk about purpose, and the left leaves and godlessness leaves potentially people without purpose. You're not really allowed to have purpose. And yet the masking and and all of this shutdown, people embraced this purpose of, I don't wear my mask for me, I wear it for you. People have an inherent need for purpose. They won't turn to God. They won't turn to religion for purpose. They won't turn to their country. They won't turn to, but this masking and shutting down and sitting on their couch, I don't do it for me, I do it for you, fed into this inherent human need for purpose. Did you see the same thing?
I very much saw that. It's, the new phrasing is mass formation psychosis, right?
Exactly.
But it's really what it's more aptly described as you just described it, Karen, which is this: people have an inherent need for purpose.
Yeah.
And they have this inherent purpose, and they don't know where it comes from. So if you don't believe in God, okay, well, that's fine. You don't believe in God, but for some reason you have this nagging need to do something very important in the world. So that manifests itself like, what's the word, whack-a-mole, where if it's not fighting COVID and making sure that you save other people's lives by masking up, well, then it's climate change, right? If it's not that, then it's saving the polar bears one way or the other. Something has to be done in order to save something. And they've got to have purpose. And not once do these people ever ask themselves, why do I have this nagging need for a purpose? Why? Right? I mean, the leopard, the dog, the cat, the turtle, for that matter, they don't have this nagging sense of purpose like we humans do. We silly humans, we have this need to effectuate something great. We have to save the planet, not just other human beings, not this need to do something very, very important. And we never bother to ask ourselves, why do I have this sense? Why is it so important for me to do this? Why am I fighting against climate change? They don't understand it. It's misdirected need for God. That's really what it is. They won't admit it, but they never even bother asking the question, why do I have this sense of purpose in the first place? But what you said about masks, that's exactly right. I mean, I think a lot of people who are still wearing the masks, it's this need. I guarantee you that every single person who's still wearing the mask, guarantee there's not a one of them who has a serious belief in God. How about that? I mean, I allow for the possibility, but I guarantee you, if you were to grab anybody who is now wearing a mask routinely outside, let's say, okay, and you interviewed that person, you asked him, how important is God in your life? Is that a major factor? Is on a scale of 1 to 10? Like for you and me, Karen, I would say 9.5, 10, right? God is everything. For such a person, he might say, 1.5, 0 to 1.5. Yeah. He allows for the possibility. But that's the reason why, because it's like we've achieved our mission, so to speak. But these people still need purpose, and they don't know what to do without their purpose, right? The mask gave them that purpose. So they'll move along until someone tells them to have some sort of purpose for something else.
I love absolutely everything that you said. And it obvious, of course, but it got me thinking, the left exploits this need for purpose. Oh, time and again, it's COVID, it's climate change, it's whatever, it's Black Lives Matter. We have purpose. We have a purpose, but they have deflected it towards their goals. The right has not figured out how to, if we redirect it to God, that's a harder fight than to do this thing on Tuesdays, or right. It's a harder case to make. So how do we do that? Because they take our inherent purpose, need for purpose, and exploit it. How do we combat that? How do we realign? Wow. Another way of saying that is go ahead.
Well, it's a great question. How do we get people to understand that they have misdirected purposes, and they're doing things for bad purposes? They don't realize that they are being, whenever you stray away from God and you still have this this urge for a purpose, more likely than not, whatever you're seeking to achieve is actually going to hurt. We saw this with COVID, the response to COVID. It actually did hurt. You and I saw from the very beginning. I remember, Karen, you said it, I said it. This will lead to devastating consequences by the shutdown. And we talked about depression. We talked about suicide. We talked about child abuse and spousal abuse.
The children,
and the retardation of their development, and how, and all the invisible things that are happening, where people lose their jobs and have to reinvent themselves one way or the other. They can't support their families in different countries, and how the rest of the world depends so much on America's market. These ripple effects are far greater than anything that COVID wrought on the world. And for what? So we shut down the entire economy, not just of America, but of the world.
Yeah.
And then you look back and you say, let's put it this way. Nobody has said, I have not heard anybody saying the following. Gosh, it was a really tough 2 years. What a long, hard road that was. But gosh, golly, we saved hundreds of thousands of lives, right? Said no one. No one has said that.
Right.
Because they can't say that.
They can't say that.
They cannot. It's an all hypothetical universe that they play up. We now know from the Johns Hopkins study that the most, in terms of the numbers of lives that may have been saved, is at most 0.2%, not 2%, 0.2%. And that's being very generous.
May have, yes.
Yeah, may have. And that is, it just doesn't feel like it was worth it. It was, by no stretch was it worth it. Just considering all that damage that was wrought on civilization. So, and now, one could argue that Ukraine, that the war in Ukraine was an indirect product of the COVID shutdown, and so many other things were the indirect product of that, to say nothing of the suicides that we just talked about. So, how do we get people to recognize that? That is an issue. And I think that and this is the mission of my books, is to sound the clarion call, to talk about what a world without God looks like, that we need to speak in terms of the actual diagnosis of our social ills. If you don't, it's like a doctor. If you go to the doctor and you complain about something, and he tells you that the problem is that, I don't know, you're not skipping rope enough. I mean, no, doc, it's because, and that's the issue for him. But the actual issue is that you're not drinking enough water. Okay, well, your dehydration problem is not going to get fixed.
Right.
You're dehydrated because you're not drinking enough water. Drinking more water, there's your situation. And we don't have that. We unfortunately, we have a society where, things don't collapse overnight. They take years, sometimes decades. And then one day you realize, whoa, our civilization just collapsed.
Right. And
they'll wonder why. They still won't know exactly why. You and I will know why. It's because of our abandonment of God. But the same, on a microcosm level, for example, we look at the plight of African Americans, poverty level, and all the issues. For most on the left, including far left Black Americans, they'll say that's because of systemic racism. But you and I will look at it and say, no, no one's going to deny that there's some degree of racism that has played a part. But that's far smaller than the role of fatherlessness. That is a huge factor. That might be 60 to 80% of the problem.
Right.
In terms of the plight of the Black person in America, because that's where crime comes from, fatherlessness and so on. And then, of course, the welfare state, which probably explains the other 20%.
Right.
Inherent racism, maybe 2%, maybe 3%. I don't know. So, but if you say that it's only racism that has created the plight of the American Black family, then you're not going to get to the answer. You'll always have the same problem.
Right.
It will never be fixed. Just like the doctor. Well, you'll never be fixed with your dehydration, dizziness, and nausea and everything else if you don't realize that it's a question of dehydration, and you need some water, buddy. That's it. And that's what it is with God. If we do not have a society if we don't recognize that the reason why our civilization is and has been what it is for all these centuries, 2.5 centuries now, is because of God being in the middle of it. If you don't realize that and you just think you can do it without God, well, then you're going to just end up being just like all the other schmuck European countries that kind of meander and do nothing with their civilizations. Isn't that inevitable?
Yeah. Yeah. So without a correct diagnosis, whatever you do as treatment won't address it. The issue, though, of course, is they're never aiming to treat the thing, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So we want things to get better, to be ameliorated, and God is the path. To them, they want destruction, and therefore, godlessness is in fact the right path, because
it's a goal in and of itself. You're right.
It really is, because you're destroying the individual, you're destroying relationships, you're destroying the family, you're destroying society, you're destroying culture, you're destroying education, you're destroying science, you're destroying, everything. You've subverted purpose, because the goal is that destruction, right? The goal is that destruction to then build utopia. So we see it as destructive and therefore bad.
Mm-hmm.
They see it as destructive and therefore good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, it's the ultimate. It's the ultimate path. They do seek an atheistic future because they do want to bring down America. They don't believe in American exceptionalism, or for that matter, civilizational exceptionalism. They want to reject. And I know as a teacher, they want to destroy all the Western values. They want to destroy Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, all the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, all the things that helped bring us to where we are today as a civilization. They want all of that to disappear. And now the part of the reason why, and in fact, the major reason why, is that there's nothing more addictive, there's nothing more tempting, there's nothing more alluring than the prospect of not being accountable. People love that. And conversely, being accountable and being responsible, with all its wonders and all its creation of a fantastic and better civilization, at the same time, it's very hard. It requires effort. People are inherently lazy. They'd rather not be accountable. They'd rather just, if you can convince them that they will get all the goodies that they want, money, free education, free healthcare, free sex, free drugs for that matter, well, then they'll sign up. They'll be happy to. Yeah. Because they don't want the work. They want it both ways. They want the benefit, the belief that they'll get everything that they could ever possibly want in their lives and not have to work for it. That is what the far left wants to deliver to the average American citizen. That's the promise that he's giving them. And people will buy into it. No hard work. And at the same time, I get all these goodies. Awesome. And and that's very hard to fight.
Right. And that has two effects. Well, many, but at least two that immediately come to mind. First is you'd have to be an idiot to keep working hard because, right? But the second is, I know what an incredibly hardworking person you are. You have a full-time job and you do this and you do this and you write books and you're a father and you're a husband and all of this. And I'm very hardworking, and everyone I know who does these things, literally at the end of a day, when you feel best is having accomplished something. And as a teacher, when I saw my students the happiest, I mean, when they grew before your very eyes, is when they accomplished something they didn't think they could. So when you promise this free stuff, you've just killed that thing in them, and you've deprived them of some of man's greatest joyous moments.
Yeah, that's right.
How cruel is that?
Yeah, it is a cruel thing to do. You cannot, we humans need to strive. We need to learn from our own mistakes, and we need to create. My dad was very big into creation, and he talked about how God expects us to create, to do something great with our lives, to make the world a better place, to kun olam, as we say in Judaism, in a good way, and to just be a better neighbor, to be a better husband, better father, and so on. These are the things that make life worth living. And
Yes.
the atheist, the godless, they don't see the point of it. They expect it literally to be handed to them on a silver
Yeah.
platter. And not only that, but they feel like it's their God-given right to receive it that way.
Right.
That's the narcissism involved in atheism,
That's
isn't
a
it?
great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also a harder political, you know, we'll give you everything for free without you
Yeah.
doing anything. If you work really hard, you will accomplish great things. It's a,
Right.
it's a harder sell.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
yet, and yet, um, it is the truth.
yeah.
And that's the very
Yeah.
hard thing.
Yeah.
But all this leads me to think that looking at the destruction of atheism, and I know we have to wrap up, the destruction of atheism, the destruction of the emptiness, the destruction of all of that it's doing to the individual and to society, while it's a harder sell, the solution is really very simple,
Yes.
right? If godlessness is the problem, where do we turn for the answer?
We just bring God right back. It's not that hard. It's a
Not that
very
hard.
easy answer. That's the beauty of it is, 90, I would say 98%, frankly, I would like to say 100%, but I'll allow for the possibility. 98% of society's ills would be rectified almost overnight were we to bring back God into our lives, not only from a social point of view, like church and make it serious and such, but if we brought it into our own individual lives, if we really saw that God was truly the creator of the universe and expects us to be accountable to one another, and that we really understood that, each one of us, and had pursued our notion of God as we are, I think, individually duty bound to do, we would have a true utopia. It would be exactly the utopia that they claim to want, but they want to do it without God. It's like the Johnny Cash song. It's a U2 song sung by Johnny Cash. They say they want the kingdom, but they don't want God in it. And that's exactly what they want.
Wow.
It's just too much for them to have God in it, just too much,
Right.
because that would be obligation, that would be accountability, that would be hard work. They just can't fathom that. It's just pure laziness, atheism. And I'll say about atheism, and I know we need to go, but that's the one common thing that I've seen among all atheists, is that they don't really want to debate you. They don't really want to energize. You talk to them about free will. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the numbers, the probabilities, the fine tuning of the universe. And they're so blithe about the response. They'll say, okay, well, there's no such thing as free will. Okay, there's no such thing as consciousness. Well, there could be a perfectly satisfactory explanation as to why the universe became as it is without God, or without a creator at least. So you're stupid. Go, bye. But these are not intellectually honest answers.
Right.
That the burden of proof is on them at this point to explain the randomness of the universe and the non-fine tuning of the universe one way or the other. They can't do it. So, but it's hard work, and that's why the atheist will never get there. It's like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, when she goes from the black and white color, to and it opens the door, now has a world full of color. It's hard to go back once you see color, once you understand it. And that's the way I feel with God. Once you discover God and you understand not only the beauty of God and how wonderful God can be to you, but how it all makes so much more sense with God, and how you can be a better person with God, and how God's central role, how to appreciate God's role in the creation of civilization. When you see that, your life is so much more rich, and it's impossible to go back. It just is. I don't know of anybody who has ever gone back to being an atheist once they've truly discovered that God is real. I mean, it's a cool thing, but it does require work. There's no doubt about it. But like you said, it's when you roll up your sleeves and you achieve something great.
Right.
There's no greater sense of happiness. I did that, you say. I found something great, and boy, oh boy, I am so glad I did it. That's what God is.
Right. And the consequences of the one versus the other, even if you haven't jumped in with whole believingness, the consequences of the one versus the consequences of the other are hard
Right.
to argue. So there's even merit in, well, I shouldn't even put it as a declarative. Is there merit in acting as if? Because these are the behaviors that turn out to have good consequences.
Wow, I love that question. And I have to answer it as I would have had I been an atheist, had I continued to being an atheist, because I know what my former self would say to that, to say, look, if it ain't true, it ain't true. And I'm not about to jump into it just to make myself feel better. You know, I never adopted that. On the other hand, I did take note that those people who tended to have faith in their lives tended to be healthier, not just happier, but they tended to be healthier. They tended to be more productive, citizens. They tended to be kinder. And so the temptation to say, well, maybe I ought to look into this business. Maybe not just kind of say I believe because I want to believe, but really look into it deeply. In the same way that, when I was little, I don't know about you, but I mean, I know you'll appreciate this as a teacher. When I saw a mathematical formula, E equals MC squared, I didn't just take it on faith. It's true. I know that it's true.
Very true. Right.
But I would want to know why. I would do the simplification of the equation and figure it out for myself. Then I appreciated it.
Yes.
Right?
So true. Great point.
Yeah. So
Great
that's
point.
the way it should be with all of us and God. It's great to accept God in your life. I love that. It's better than nothing for sure. But you have a duty to find God yourself, to figure it out for yourself, why God is real. Because you should get to the point that not believing in God should be one of the most absurd, if not the most absurd proposition you've ever held in your brain ever. That's where you should be. You should be able to study God, to figure out God, and so that you come to that conclusion, that to think of the notion of there being no God and that the universe was so randomly created, that should be absurd to you. But it does take work.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great note to end on. What a fabulous conversation, Barak. I so appreciate it. This has really been incredibly illuminating and enlightening. Thank you for taking the time. I hope we do this again very soon.
I would love that, Karen. Thank you so much for having me.
My honor, truly, my honor. Thank you.